Welcome to Tales from a Retro Gamer, episode number 5. Today is a super special day because we're flashing all the way back to 1986 when I met Ozzy Osbourne and his band and Sharon Osbourne, and I had the temerity to ask Ozzy if he wanted to play a game of Pac-Man. So before I get into that, let's have a little historical perspective. My high school years were much different than most. Instead of just sort of going to school every day, doing my work, and hanging out with friends maybe a little after, coming home doing homework, mine was much different. I had a full-time job my junior and senior years, and I went to concerts all the time with my friends Johnny and Bill and a few others. We saw some of the greatest bands of the time. We saw Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Journey, Van Halen, and on and on and on. Two of our favorites were Ozzy and Kiss. Huge fans of Ozzy and Kiss. And we would dress up and we'd wear black makeup and the bandanas, scarves, whatever, dressed in black. Some of the shows we were harmless, but we had a blast, had a lot of fun. Kind of crazy, kind of got out of hand sometimes, but overall just some good old-fashioned American kids trying to have a good time. So what we would do, instead of just, again, abnormal, instead of just going to the concert then coming home, getting a good night's sleep and all that, what we would typically do, or at least for several of the shows, what we'd try to do is actually meet the bands. Now this was the days before, these big expensive meet and greets, before that kind of thing. There were record store appearances which we would go to, which I'll cover in a little bit, but you didn't have to pay a fortune to meet these bands if you knew what you were doing. So what we would do, we would hear about record appearances. We met Kiss and Wasp and Rat. They would set up at record stores promoting their latest album or their concert or whatever. You would get in line and you could get to meet the band, maybe take some photos, get free autographs. It was very cool. It was just a promotional thing, so you didn't have to actually pay anything. So we took advantage of that when we could. So let's get to Saturday, May 10th, 1986. Ozzy and Metallica were going to be in concert that night at the Tarrant County Convention Center. And so, of course, we were massive Ozzy fans, and of course we love Metallica. And so it was a huge tour because it was Ozzy's Ultimate Sin album, and it was Metallica's Master of Puppets. Huge records, great bands, so of course we're gonna go. Well, that afternoon, Metallica had a appearance at a record store. So we went that afternoon, met the band. It was awesome. This was back when Cliff Burton was still alive. So cool meeting James Hetfield. The whole band, it was awesome. They were cool. They were a little out of it because it was afternoon. You could tell they were probably asleep usually at this time. But they were fun. They were cool to meet, and that was very exciting meeting Metallica. Well, that was the afternoon. So after that, we drove to the Tarrant County Convention Center to sort of case the joint before that night's concert. We went around to the back to find out where the tour buses would come and go, and we figured out a strategical place to park so we would have the best chance of meeting the band after the concert. So what we did, we found a good area to park in. Then we went back home, hung out for a few hours or whatever, went back to the show later that night, Tarrant County Convention Center. We found a good place to park near the back, like I said, where the buses would come out. And it was a phenomenal show. Ozzy and Metallica were both just killing it. Great concert. We had good seats. Got some good pictures of the bands in concert. It was awesome. One of the best shows I've ever been to. So after the show, instead of like normal people going home or going out to eat or whatever, we hung out behind the Tarrant County Convention Center, like I said, by where the buses would come out. So we waited maybe half an hour to an hour, and finally the overhead doors slowly rose. Limousines, buses, and all that thing started pulling out. Well, we saw this one bus in particular with horses, big mural of horses on the side. We thought, well, that looks kind of like a special bus. Maybe that's their bus. Maybe that's where the band is. And sure enough, as it pulled up or pulled out, they had the curtains open, and you could see inside. And crazily enough, we saw Ozzy sitting there with his sitting there eating KFC out of a bucket, which was crazy. We were totally starstruck, so we're just kind of standing there. Anyway, we gathered our senses. When we saw the bus pulling out, we ran to the car, which was nearby, because we had plotted it out very carefully that afternoon. We jumped in the car, followed the bus. So we had done our research. We may not have been great high school students, but we were very smart about meeting bands. And so we researched it ahead of time. We knew they were playing El Paso later that, like the next day or so. And so we knew they were heading west. So we jumped in our cars, followed the bus. We had no idea where they were going to stop, if they were going to stop. We assumed with such a long drive they were going to stop. It was a Saturday night. We were prepared to drive all night if we had to. We were going to stop wherever they were. And so, fortunately, I mean, we would have gone literally all the way to El Paso if we had to. So this was 1986, so I was 19, so little old enough to do something like this. So luckily, about an hour outside of Fort Worth, the buses, there were a couple of buses and a couple of cars following, pulled off and stopped at a place called the Iron Skillet in Weatherford, like a greasy spoon truck stop kind of place. Well, the bus pulled over, and they were just gonna refuel, clean out the bus, do all that kind of stuff. So during that time, we were waiting for the band to come outside of the bus, to come out to exit the bus and go inside. We waited maybe 10, 15 minutes, and finally the doors open, the band starts coming outside, and we're gonna try to approach them, and their handler said, wait till they come back out, they're coming back out, let them go inside, do their thing, and when they're coming back outside, you can meet them, take photos and whatever. That sounded fine, but we kind of followed them inside, and Ozzy saw us. He saw this, these kids coming up. Ozzy kind of looked at us, kind of slightly alarmed, and he goes, Sharon! So yes, years before the Osbournes TV show, Ozzy would call his wife whenever he needed something or he was concerned about something. So yeah, that was very authentic about the TV show because we heard it ourselves in 1986. And so once we got inside, the whole band and Sharon was there. And so Ozzy was just sort of looking around. Ozzy's eyes were very dilated. You could tell he had been up for a couple of days or was on some, drug or something. His eyes were dilated and he was a little out of it. Big surprise there. But he was just kind of looking around at the little gift shop area in the Iron Skillet, looking at trinkets, fumbling around, little souvenirs and whatnot. Sharon kind of scowled at us a little bit, but she said hello. She was sort of friendly, I guess. She probably had to deal with punks like us before, so she was tolerant, I guess. Jakey Lee sort of made a U-turn, went back outside, had a little smoke break, and we actually got a picture of that. Randy Castillo stopped off at the little arcade as you entered. They had 4 or 5 machines lined up, including Pac-Man, which I'll mention a little bit later. And he stopped down and put a quarter in pole position, played some pole position. But we went on inside because that's where Ozzy was, or Ozzy was going. Phil Suzanne, who's also in the band, he had to get some Tylenol. He was their bass player. He got some Tylenol because he'd had a back injury during the show. And so they were sort of milling around and nobody was really paying much attention. It was a Saturday night, so there were quite a few people in the restaurant, got a few turned heads. But then this waitress walks up, absolutely freaking out. She reminded me of Florence Jean Castleberry from the old sitcom Alice. She had the big beehive hairdo and the works. And she goes, "Oh my God, Ozzy Osbourne in my restaurant, oh my God." So she's just freaking out and she's just going crazy. And so she stops down, gets autographs and everything. And Ozzy and Sharon, they were a little amused, so they were indulgent. They did their thing, get their pictures, met them. They were pretty friendly to this lady who was just going nuts. I think they were pretty amused, so they were willing to just sort of tolerate that kind of crazy obsession because this lady was losing her mind. And so that went on for a little bit, and then they were pretty much through. I assume the bus was probably about ready, so they started working their way out, and we just sort of followed them outside. And once we were out there, we stopped them down, or actually, when they were on the way out, when we were going through the little entryway in the arcade area, I flashed 2 quarters at Ozzy, and I said, "Ozzy, do you want to play Pac-Man?" And he looked at me. He didn't scowl. He didn't just dismiss me. He didn't tell me to bugger off or anything. He goes, "I don't play." Very British, super British, very honest and just response. He goes, "I don't play." Like as if he were a gamer and he did play, he would have stopped down to play Pac-Man with me. That's how he seemed to sound. Anyway, it was very cool and it was exciting. We were all completely starstruck. Once we got outside, we it was time to start taking the pictures and getting the autographs and all that good stuff. Unfortunately, I sold my autographs on eBay in the late '90s when I started doing that, but I kept the photos, thankfully. But we met, we talked to Ozzy a little bit. He, like I said, he was a little out of it. And when we first, of course, Ozzy was the one we wanted to get our picture made with first because we were so excited, and just in case they cut us off or something. And we'd forgotten to, on the old cameras, you kind of had to roll that little wheel or whatever to get the next picture started. And we forgot to do that, so they're like, and so we did that. Anyway, they were patient with us, and so we got our pictures with Ozzy. And at the time, it didn't really occur to us to get our pictures made with Sharon. We knew who Sharon was because we were big Ozzy fans, but this was long before the TV show, long before she was on TV talk shows, long before the Osbournes. So she wasn't famous, really, and the general public really didn't know who she was. So it didn't really occur to her to get her picture made with her. But regardless, it was very cool meeting the band. And so just a little perspective on how exciting this was for me. I had been an Ozzy fan since their Black Sabbath years and since his solo stuff in the early 80s. But I became a huge fan back in 1983. There was this girl I was going with at the time and that I went to high school with. Her name was Leanne. And I was a junior. And she was an Ozzy fan. And we went out for a couple of months or whatever, just one of those goofy high school relationships that lasted, not that long. I'm sure I wasn't that great of a boyfriend. She broke up with me, but one thing she did was she left behind in my car a cassette tape of Blizzard of Oz. That's the one with Crazy Train, the song you hear all the time in arenas and in commercials, and it's a totally overdone song. Still, it's cool to hear Ozzy. Back then Ozzy was relatively scandalous, with all the biting the head off the dove, the bat, the Alamo incident, and all that good stuff. Didn't care about any of all that. I just loved his music. Well, she had left that cassette in my car, but I listened to the tape. Me and my friend Johnny listened to it again, absolutely fell in love with this album. And so we started buying Ozzy's other solo records, Diary of a Madman, and then followed it forward with Bark at the Moon, Ultimate Sin, all these great records. To this day, huge Ozzy fan. And then we went back to his Black Sabbath days. As you can see, big Black Sabbath fan as well. And so we just became completely obsessed with Ozzy. Loved every single song, knew every lyric by heart. And so meeting Ozzy was just super cool, super exciting. I wish we had taken more photos, but we got what we got, maybe from better angles, more variety of pictures. But they were kind of in a hurry. We were starstruck, barely knew what we were doing. But at least we had the forethought to bring pins for autographs, and I wish we'd have brought some albums to sign, but what are you going to do? We at least got some cool pictures with the band, and we got to meet every member, and it was awesome. And again, in these days where to meet a band you kind of have to pay a fortune to get these meet and greets set up, but back then security was more relaxed. You could meet bands in hotels, you could follow their tour bus maybe, and that does happen from time to time still. Maybe you've done that. Maybe you've met a band after a show. Maybe you've run into them in the hotel. In the comments below, who is your favorite band? Have you met them before? Have you met any famous rock stars, any famous celebrities? Just leave in the comments below with your experience. Maybe yours is similar to mine. Maybe you've met them back then. Maybe you've met them more recently. Maybe you've done the meet and greet. Maybe you've shelled out a few $100s. Was that worth it? Regardless, let me know in the comments below. Also, if you could subscribe to my channel, that would be awesome. Click a thumbs up on this episode if you enjoyed it. Regardless, lots more to come. Thanks for tuning in. Peace out.